Today's kickoff, our first session of this series, is with the one and only Rachel Hailey. And Rachel is going to be presenting to us on navigating bias in your business. And we actually reached out to Rachel about this a couple months back now, specifically because she has a really interesting background, both professionally and personally, but with a lot of work in outdoor recreation and DEI work as it applies to that realm. So much so that she's out on her own doing this as her full-time gig now, and we're really excited to have someone with a unique perspective joining us today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Rachel and let her take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. What a wonderful, wonderful introduction. So hello, everyone. I'm Rachel with Rachel Hailey and Associates Consulting. And I do want to welcome you all to the Navigating Bias in Business workshop, again, in partnership with 1Berkshire. So in a moment, we'll begin our workshop on navigating bias. But first, so that we can create the most value here today, I'll ask that you limit any distractions that you might have. So close all those work tabs that might be hanging out there on your computer so we can all be here together. You'll also want to have paper and pen nearby so that you can take some notes if you choose to do so. And lastly, if for some reason you get disconnected, feel free to rejoin Zoom here on that same link from your email. Okay, so many thanks and welcome. I'm going to go ahead and get my screen started up for you here so you can see everything that you need to see. So just to begin, a little bit about me. Again, I'm Rachel Hailey of Rachel Hailey and Associates Consulting. We offer diversity, equity, and inclusion services centered on actionable systems to really get you the results that you're looking for. So we offer high-level executive coaching, foundational trainings for staff and leadership teams, workshops and webinars just like this one. And I'm a speaker, a writer, and a business transformationalist. And during my time in this work, I've created systems in tandem with organizations that really align with their vision and commitment to inclusivity, welcoming, belonging, and equity. I'm also a North Adams resident. And when I'm not giving talks like these, I can actually be found hunting magical creatures in the woods with my daughter and our German Shepherd puppy. So that's just a little bit about me. So coming over to our workshop, excuse me, I'll give a brief session overview and then we'll really get started. So first, what we'll look at is going over exactly what unconscious bias is. So we'll give a definition and talk more about where our biases originate. We'll also uncover how unconscious bias impacts diversity and inclusion, both at the organizational level and the community level. Next will be the types of biases and action steps you can take in your business to overcome these biases and become more inclusive. And then finally, we'll open up this session for a Q&A toward the end. So away we go. So getting into the definition of unconscious bias, some folks use the term implicit bias, and they're basically interchangeable. So in either use of the term, we are referring to those quick and often inaccurate judgments that we make based on limiting facts and life experiences. These judgments can give individuals and groups both unearned advantage and disadvantages as well. So an important thing to note is that people can be biased to just about anything, not just things like, gender expression, sexual orientation, age, race, but also things like communication style or even what someone does in their free time. So what we know is that unconscious bias operates outside of our conscious awareness. They are non-conscious drivers. They are cognitive quirks of a sort that influence how people see the world. They appear to be universal to most of humanity, hardwired into our brain as part of our genetic and cultural heritage. They exist outside of our conscious awareness. So you can't go shopping, enter a conversation, or walk down the street without your biases kicking in. They are with us absolutely and all the time. So another thing that's true and interesting about our biases is that they run contrary to our consciously stated beliefs. So a great example of this in business would be something like my saying, well, yes, of course, I'm committed to hiring a diverse team. And yet, when I look around my team or my boardroom or organization, everyone may look just like me. We have similar educational background, similar socioeconomic status. The list can go on and on. So unconscious biases are triggered by automatic mental associations we make between people, ideas, objects, and attitudes, and stereotypes that we hold about people, ideas, and attitudes. So I call this human pilot. Bias is not intentional. It's part of the lens by which we choose to see the world. So when looking at breaking down bias and creating new systems to have a more inclusive business, what we're really talking about is getting off of automatic, going from autopilot to human pilot. Sometimes when folks don't fit into our internalized expectations, our mental models, if you will, we can sometimes have trouble seeing their talents, seeing their potential, and their unique gifts clearly, which means that we interact with people differently. So when we see how bias can impact our behavior, we can take new action and get off automatic to create an inclusive culture where everyone can innovate, where everyone can lead, and provide solutions to our toughest problems. So on the whole, biases are adaptive. They help people to make those quick, efficient decisions and judgments with minimum cognitive effort. So why is that important? Think of the time where you've been in your car and you've been driving home, right? Not really paying attention, and you've gotten all the way to your house, and you pull into your driveway and you realize you have zero recollection of that journey. So sometimes having those mental associations working for us is to our advantage. Unfortunately, they can also blind us to new information and even inhibit us from considering new options when making those critical decisions. So the good news is you are not alone in your bias. As wild as it may be to admit, it is possible to be unconsciously biased regarding race or gender, age, social class, and many other sources of difference. You could, or could your decision not to hire one person versus another, could that be based on their social class? It's important to weigh in and ask ourselves these questions as we begin the process of navigating bias in business. So as David Rock of the Neuro Leadership Institute says, if you have a brain, you have a bias. And now I'd like to take a look and really get into where these biases come from. What are the sources? So where do biases come from? In short, everywhere. Our bias sources are all around us all of the time. We are constantly bombarded with potential bias fuel, is how I think of it. So some of these sources are including media. So the books that we read, the shows that we binge watch, the content we consume, social media, things like that. Our news and our imagery in news. So any network at any time has a message, and one that is formative in our experiences. So our conversations are another source with our friends and peers, and even the checkout clerk. We're constantly collecting data. We're constantly collecting that information. Another source is institutional influences. So our education, for example, and other external influences as well. So we are belief machines. Given these things, we make automatic assumptions. We do this because human beings really love order. We love for the world to make sense. So we categorize, we judge, we assess, and we evaluate. And the thing is, a lot of the time, our automatic associations are incorrect. So we've all grown up in a culture full of associations and bias. And it's almost like a fog we've been breathing in our whole lives, one that can lead to confusion, disappointment, and unhealthy business culture. So here's a great example. If I say peanut butter, in America, there's an automatic association. So if I say peanut butter, most likely you're going to think jelly, right? So they go together. The association is ingrained in us, and that's a benign one. So in many forms of media, there is an overrepresentation of Black men, young Black men with an association of violence and criminality. So subconsciously, we may have come to see Black men as violent and criminal. Because of our biases being hidden, it can take some work to become aware of them, right? And how do we solve the issue of unconscious bias? So to start to become aware of our own biases through mindfulness, active reflection, inclusive behavior, these are sort of the building blocks to creating a culture that we want to see. So doing the work here not only benefits our organizations, but the people around us, it benefits our communities as well. So at this point, I want to take a minute to set a slightly broader context for our session today. So we're seeing a great deal of increased interest on implicit bias, and it does provide an opportunity to open and deepen conversations within our organizations and community centered on equity, welcoming, and social justice. Given the current context of our country at the moment, it's no surprise that this is coming to the forefront of our conversations when looking at our business culture. So most work on implicit bias is centered around increasing awareness of individuals and shifting how we view others. So that's one of the focuses for today. However, leading to meaningful change, an exploration of implicit bias, it really must be situated as part of a much longer or much larger conversation on how current inequities in our organizations came to be, also how they're held in place and what our role as leaders are in perpetuating inequities despite our good intentions. Our success is being able to create a business that is equitable and inclusive. It really has to do with our own willingness and ability to challenge our beliefs, challenge our history, our biases, and the long impacts of structural racism, learn how biases work, and then take action to interrupt them so that we can create something new. So thinking on an organizational level, where might unconscious bias impact our decision making in the workplace? So in a moment, I'll give some time for a more in-depth reflection process for everyone. We're going to start with the simple question of where might unconscious bias impact our decision making in the workplace? So I think Ben's going to put on some music for us, and just for a minute or two, take some time with this and really explore. If you'd like to drop your thoughts into the chat, feel free to do so, and we'll give some time to answer this question. So where in your organization or business might unconscious bias be showing up, in impactful ways? We'll start the clock, and I'll give us about 2 minutes to add any thoughts into the chat that might come up. about another 30 seconds. You can go ahead and finish up that last thought. A couple of really good things in the chat so far. All right, so I did see some pretty amazing things here in the chat. So thank you so much for participating. A lot of those were here on the slide, actually. So in the chat, I did see hiring for sure, hiring practices and where our come from is in terms of hiring and promotions. Compensation, I did see in the chat as well. Offering feedback is another place that quite often, our biases can show up, in how we both deliver that feedback and receive feedback. Sometimes we're open to those possibilities and other times not so much based on our, implicit bias. Resource allocation is another area where unconscious bias does impact the decision-making, as well as assignments, planning, and performance management. So Ben, can you, were there any other things in the chat that I missed? Any other thoughts that folks had? Just want to make sure we're getting to everyone. Nothing yet. Yeah, I see hiring and promotion, dynamics and meetings. So, excuse me, power dynamic and meeting for sure. Customer relations. Yep, thank you, Deborah, in response to customer inquiries. So there are many places where this does show up. Absolutely. So what is, the common link between bias and diversity, equity, and inclusion, or diversity and inclusion? So the potential areas of impact due to bias are areas like engagement and retention. Ultimately, we're looking at our business results also. So in thinking about, engagement, research shows that there's a strong connection between employee connection and engagement and productivity. So studies have actually found a sense of inclusion that's strongly linked to engagement, and folks that have felt included, in their environment, they're much more fully engaged and excited, right? They're passionate about the work they're doing, and they're solid in their commitment to the organization. So considering the impact on innovation, we know that diverse teams make better decisions and are more innovative than teams, more creative than teams that are on the homogenous side. So this speaks to how important diverse viewpoints can be when finding the best solutions. So finally, when we think about the impact on customers and markets, treating employees well, right, is one of the highest impact ways for an organization to really walk their talk when it comes to company values with both customers, clients, associates, and staff. So for an organization to be successful, it's got to understand that diverse markets and representation matters to remain relevant and essential. So bias comes in many different forms. Here are some examples for you. So what assumptions do you think someone makes based on the following characteristics? So someone with purple hair and lots of tattoos versus someone with a more conservative appearance. What are a deeply religious person versus someone who's not religious at all? A graduate, perhaps, of an Ivy League school versus someone with a high school diploma, and a college graduate versus someone mid-career. In thinking about these things, what we do know is that employees that differ from their colleagues, whether it be, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic background, generational differences, educational ones, folks often hold back or cover up and hide portions of themselves at work, for fear of those negative judgments. And there's actually a term for this, and it's called identity cover. So lots of folks feel like, okay, I can work for this particular person or work for this company and not really reveal, who I am in the world. And it can be disempowering for people having to carry that weight. So given all of that, you might be thinking, well, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my business? So again, we're going to leave a little space here just for some reflection. So take a moment, and I'll leave the slide up. So we'll go through the questions on the slide and just jot down your answers. You can share them in the chat if you feel it's appropriate to do so, or you can hold your responses, if you have pen and paper nearby, just as something to reflect on personally. So the questions are, who are the people I feel I work well with and am comfortable with? Bring to mind those folks. And then what's your level of effective collaboration with that particular group or groups of people? The second question will be, who are the people I feel less comfortable with or connect with less frequently? Maybe that there's certain groups or certain folks that you shy from or hold back from. What are some steps that you could take to, connect today? And then lastly, do I value and seek diverse points of view? What can you take and start to navigate in your business, your organization, in your community, and ultimately in your day-to-day experiences? What points of view can you start to seek out that might be, different than yours? So we'll take a minute or two here and reflect again, and feel free to write down, what you're experiencing and what you're discovering and observing. And, really be clear, let yourself be clear on what this means to you personally and in your business. So we'll take about a minute here. Okay, we're going to start bringing that to a close. Some pretty beautiful things in there as well in the chat. So thank you all for sharing. All right, so moving on, we're just kind of moving on here. So the beautiful thing, really, the empowering thing about all of this is that implicit bias comes from culture. So we can think of our biases as the thumbprint of the culture on our minds. Human beings have the ability to learn and to associate two things together very quickly, and that's an innate truth. What we teach ourselves, though, and what we choose to associate with is really up to us. So despite what we may believe about our biases, once we start to notice them, really the choice comes down to us, what it is we're willing to take on and what new actions we can take from here.